Well, hey, welcome back to the Pastor Pod. We're glad you're here for another episode 72 today. And I'm excited about our guest that's coming on today, named Kody. And I know, Jay, you guys go way back. And so I am looking forward to learning from you guys and just having another transparent, honest conversation.
Yeah. Kody, if you're watching with us on YouTube, you can see Kody's face in his 300-year-old home in
That's right.
Massachusetts. I won't share too much, though. I want Kody to introduce himself. But yes, Kody and I do go, I don't know, way back's the nature.
Yeah,
Kody, how long have we known each other?
almost 10 years.
Okay, so maybe
Well,
it's been way back.
maybe
So
9.
truth be
Yeah.
told, Kody, and we can get into this in a little bit. Yes, we met at the same assessment when I first moved to Boston.
hmm
I got a green light, you didn't, but hey, we won't go there right now.
That's messed
Hey,
up, man.
so
That's true.
as you just said, Josh, Kody is joining us here on the podcast today. And Kody, listen, I don't want to steal your thunder. I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the podcast audience. Tell who are you? Tell us about your family, where you're planting, how you ended up there, all that good stuff. Take a few minutes, introduce yourself.
Well, as I said, my name is Kody. So I am married. Believe it or not, I am married. And so Lindsay is my wife. We've been married 9 years now, and we met at Netcast Church in 2014. And so that whole story is kind of crazy, of how I got to where I am now in Gloucester. And so it's a long story. I'll give you kind of a short overview of it. And so basically what happened is when I was 18, I went to a drug and alcohol rehab, and God just changed my life and called me into ministry. And I knew almost immediately that I felt like God was calling me into ministry and I wanted to do it, but I was really insecure about it because I was in rehab. I was like, God doesn't go to rehab for for pastors. And so God confirmed it outside of me and through other people around me. And so I started my journey into ministry. And then my dad one day was like, I was in Bible college, and he was like, isn't it crazy how we had to come to the South to become Christians? Because I'm actually from New England. I grew up in North Carolina, but I was born there, and all my family was from upstate New York or New England. And so he's like, we had to come to the South to become Christians, and and that just bothered me. So that bothered me, and I was like, well, I think God may be wanting me to go back up north if that's where the need is. And so I looked into it, and so I got connected with a pastor on the North Shore of Greater Boston, and I was intrigued by him because he was kind of like myself in that he didn't like fit the normal pastor kind of vibe, right? Like suit, kind of like Jay. You're kind of like this too, Josh. I don't know you that well, but I know Jay's like this, and
Josh
so
wears a suit every Sunday.
okay, yeah, I can see that. No, I'm kidding. So I got to know this guy, and I was like, I want to go learn from him. I knew I was being called back to New England, and so basically with $500 in my pocket, I moved in 2014, and to be a part of a church called Netcast on North Shore. And I wanted to plant a church in the greater Boston area. I didn't know where. But the first thing that happened was I met Lindsay, right? So she was at this church since the second service, and we met. And dude, I like when I met Lindsay, like I knew I wanted to marry her. I was like, that's it. I'm all set. Like, I want this one, Lord. I don't know if you're allowed to say that, but I was like, I really like I fell for her hard. And so she ignored me at first. She didn't want to be a she knew I was going to be a pastor, so she didn't want to be that because her dad's a pastor. And but then, long story short, went to a worship night, got her number, and the rest is history. Like literally, we got married within 10 months of knowing each other. It was just her dad was gonna tell me to chill out because I was like, literally 2 weeks in, we're like, we're getting engaged, we're getting married. The first time I ever met him, I'm asking him if I can marry his daughter, and he's like, he gets out of the car to tell me you need to chill out, and then he says he feels like God told him that it was his plan for Lindsay is that we were going to get married and it was going to be quickly. And I always joke with him like, look, man, Jesus had my back, so it is what it is. And so yeah, so I fell in love with Gloucester that year too. And so basically, someone told me at Netcast, the church I was at, you need to go to Gloucester, and you need to go there because they knew my story. I struggle with drugs and alcohol. I come from a blue collared family. And so they're like, I think you would connect well with the people there. I know you want to plant a church in Greater Boston, so just go. And so I went, and I took a team, a missions team there. We were talking to people, and I'll never forget that day. It was 2014 because I remember being on the street and feeling like God really just broke my heart for the city. Um, and I just felt like this clear, like, sense that God was calling me to this people. And so I basically almost immediately moved there. Lindsay and I were engaged. I got an apartment, and so then we got married, and we both moved to Gloucester together, and we lived there for a few years, and we were just loving Gloucester, wanted to plant a church there. And so kind of what Jay has alluded to, that when we met, we went through assessments. So this took place 2015, 2016. So Lindsay and I are married. We're in Gloucester, wanting to plant a church. And we're about to have our first kid. So we have 3 children, 3 boys.
Lindsay was pregnant at the assessment.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm in this assessment, and I go through this assessment, like, wanna plant a church in Gloucester, all this, and they come back like, you are not ready to plant a church. They're like, you're like immature, like we don't even know, like, you're too one of the things was about my social, like, interactions with people. I think I was a little too abrasive and stuff like that. And they're like, you just need to grow up more. At the time I was like 25, so they're like, you need to grow up. You're not ready to plant a church. And so that was devastating to me. Like, literally, like, all my money was tied to planting a church, all this stuff. And so I go back to Netcast with really my tail between my legs, and they're like, yeah, we fully agree. You should not plant a church. I entered 3 years of what I call a very tough time in ministry. It was my wilderness time. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I didn't understand God's voice because I was like, man, I'm called to this. And now God's like, no. And it was so confusing. I was hard to deal with. And Jay knows some of that. Like, I wasn't an easy person to deal with during that season. I was just really struggling. And so during that time, though, God used it to grow me up, right? So, like, all of my dysfunction, all the things that God wanted to do in me, he used that season to grow me up. And so basically what happened was this. So long story short, I end up going to a lunch with Jay, and I'm leaving Netcast, and Jay's like, I always joke with Jay that he kind of picked me off the wires. And he was like,
The waiver
come to
wire.
Milestone. Yeah. He's like, come to Milestone, like, I was a campus pastor for him, and all this stuff. And I loved it. Lindsay and I always say how much we loved Milestone and all of that. And COVID hit. So once COVID hit, it was like, okay, where am I going to be in a few years? Because, like, I think every church is like, what is going to happen? Like, no one knows. And I felt like God brought up Gloucester again. And so I said something to Lindsay, and she just laughed and was like, there's no way that God is calling us back to Gloucester. Like, we just got to Natick. We like Milestone. Doesn't make any sense. And so we just started talking to people about it, Jay and the pastor at Netcast, and then went through the assessment again. They gave me a green light. And so in December of 2020, we moved back to Gloucester to plant Freedom Church. And I kind of give everyone that context because it was a long journey for me, a very hard journey. I mean, I knew years ago God wanted me to plant a church in the city that he called me to, and it took a long time to just get here. And so I'm so appreciative. Like, every time, like, having 10 people at a service is like, this is great. This is great. It can be discouraging, but then at the same time, it's like you remember that how long it took us to even get here to start Freedom Church. And so it's been a long, crazy journey.
So let's go back because your story is fascinating to me, and I know a little bit of your story, so I'm going to prompt you in certain spots because I know you well and know your story. Let's go back to before we met for lunch because you went through that really quick. Because again, you said something. You said you're hard to deal with. You said you were kind of just frustrated, and I think you would agree that was a lot of that was just frustrated with where you were and where you felt like you knew you needed to be, but there was all these barriers in front. Is that an accurate statement? So you're
Yeah.
frustrated with that. You're working at Apple, you're transitioning from Netcast. You were toying with the idea of doing some other ministry things. Um, and here's the reason why is you were going and you did come on our team at Milestone for a short season. I think I remember a conversation going, "Hey Kody, at this season I'm not looking for church planners though, so you got to tell me you're not going to plant a church." And you said, "Yes, Jay, I'm not going to plant a church." And
You
then
did say
COVID
that.
hit, and you came to me and said you're going to plant a church. So, but here's why I asked this is church planting is not for everybody. As you've mentioned, there's this season, there's this long journey that everybody's story is differently. Your story just is a story of God really grooming you for where you're at now. You had to go through all of those things. But in your opinion, when you really get into your gut and your gut, deep gut, what makes church planting so important? Why not just be on staff at an existing church? You were at Netcast, you were at Milestone, you thought about going to some other places. What was it about church planting for you that really moved the needle and you just really couldn't get away from it? What was it?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I looked at the area, Cape Ann, where I'm at, so Gloucester, Cape Ann is there's 4 towns, Gloucester included, that kind of our area. There's 60,000 people. We're kind of on an island. When I look at the landscape of churches and how many churches there are that preach the gospel versus the amount of people that are here, 60,000, like there's just a great need for another church. And I think you find that all over the country, even in places in the South. Like there's always a need. Like if you break down just the laws of numbers of what it would take to reach everyone in that community, unless you're going to have mega churches, you're going to need more churches. And so there's just that practical sense where I knew going in, and they're 2 to 4% of Cape Ann is evangelical. So I'm not quick at math, but that's like 2,000 people of 60,000. Someone could fact check me, but like there's a greater need for another church. And then practically speaking, I knew God had called me to focus specifically on things like the broken, like people in addiction, mental health, and no one was doing that in our area. There are gospel churches in our area, so I don't want to say that, but there's not a lot of churches that are really reaching out to the community and those people that normally wouldn't go to church. And so I just knew that if I was going to do ministry in Gloucester, it meant planning a church. I see, honestly, like that question of like, why go work at an existing church? I would, if there wasn't a need, I would, right? Like I would, if there was great churches in our area that were crushing it, then sure. And again, it's not that these churches stink or that these churches are terrible, because I know some of those pastors, like I'm friends with them. They're doing a good job, but there's just a greater need for more. And so that's just kind of what motivated me to start it, to be honest.
Yeah, and I know your heart behind that, and I don't think anybody's going to discount the work that's being done if people are really truly pointing people to Jesus in your
Yeah.
community. But it's a numbers game, as you just said. If everybody in your community wanted to go to church and to a Bible believing, gospel believing church tomorrow, um, could they all go to church? Would there be enough room? The answer is probably no. And I know the facility you meet in, you could pack that place out and you're not gonna make a big enough dent. So the truth is church
And
planting needs to continue, right?
yeah, and the need is so great where we are, that there's 4 churches that are like, there's 4 or 5 churches outside of our church that are like gospel. They really care. And they did a worship night, these 4 churches, and 150 people showed up. And someone in our church was like, "Man, you weren't there because I couldn't make this one. I went to the one before." He was like, it was packed, 150 people. And I said to him, I was like, "Listen, that is kind of sad. Like if we look at churches, like 4 healthy churches anywhere else in the country, like there's going to be a lot more than 150 people, but the reality of it is the need here is just so great that it's
Mhm.
just it's just tough."
So church planting is something I could talk about all day long because I love church planting. I'm a huge fan of church planters and those who are willing to go and do what you're doing, Kody. And so here, let's get into the nitty gritty a little bit of church planting, because I think a lot of people, when they hear the idea of church planting, they think, okay, starting from scratch, isn't that dangerous? Isn't that kind of scary? Isn't that kind of messy? And the answer is yes, yes, and yes. So Kody, tell us, just from a church planter's perspective on the ground, you've been doing this. How long have you been at the church plant in Gloucester? How long?
So we've been here a year and a half. We've been doing weekly services since October of last year.
So in the year and a half, what has made church planting so messy? What makes it messy? What are the factors that bring the mess to church planting?
It's actually over 2 years. I just did that math in my head. So I mean, the biggest thing about the messiness that I've seen is just dealing with people. Like we have people in our community that are interacting with us that, they not only do they not go to church, they're dealing with domestic issues, they're dealing with like real life problems. And so what you find is that anything that you add to your church, so if your goal is to reach that person, like you start to realize very quickly that your programs and your strategy is not going to really reach them. What they need is Jesus. And so you got the messiness of the people, and then you have the limitations of knowing that, like, you practically in your own strength and own strategy, you can't really change them and you can't really help them. Like, you need God to move. And so there's just this desperation, I feel like, that makes it really messy, where like, as a planter, if I'm not on my knees with Jesus, then I'm vulnerable. I'm vulnerable in so many different areas of my life because that pressure is so great, right? It's just all of it, like the organization, the needs, the financial needs, the people that you're trying to reach. And it's like you're exposed. And so you have to be on your knees and be calling out to God on a consistent basis. And that's something God's doing in me right now, because you run in these church plant circles, and they want to tell you all about your strategies and how you can reach your community. And when you get on the ground and you start doing it, you realize that those things are good and they're effective with getting awareness about what you're doing. But like, you're not going to change anyone by doing like an Easter egg hunt. Like, no one's changed by that. It helps you. It helps them know that you're there for them. But like, when they go back to their house, their kids still have a dad that wants to hit them. So what do you do? And that's the weight of it, is that people are so messy that you need God to move and work. And I don't mean to get that dark. That's just our context. So yeah, so it's just the people, man. You gotta be desperate for God to move in a way that is powerful.
And that goes for any church, whether it's church plant or not. People are just messy in general. I'm messy, you're messy, Josh is messy.
Mhm.
And Josh, I want to give you a chance to chime in, because Kody and I can just talk, but you're definitely here, and I want to make sure you could chime in. If there's anything you want to ask Kody, or follow
I'm,
up, or maybe
I'm enjoying
clarification or thing.
listening. This is such good stuff. I love your heart, Kody, and just your passion to follow the Holy Spirit's leading. And it sounds like you have a real good like understanding of your community and like the area that you're in. And God does call us many times to places that, not just that we relate to the people, but that you have a broken heart for the people. So
Mm.
talk a little bit about that. You've already kind of hit on that, like you have an understanding of your community and like what you're praying God will do, because it's way beyond our human ability to bring change. We know that the gospel is what changes people, and the Holy Spirit is who convicts and encourages and does all that. But what have you seen God do since you launched the church? And tangible, what are some tangible, maybe a story or just ways that you've seen God's hand, like you're saying, where it only made sense because God did it, and you put it out there, you preached, you're being strategic and having events, you're connecting. But what are some elements of just God working that has been so encouraging to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that happened over the course of last year, so Lindsay and I and our family's been in Gloucester for 2 years now, like I was saying, a little over 2 years, but we didn't start doing ministry until mid 21, and then we didn't start doing services really until last year. We started with monthly, and one of the reasons why we did is because we couldn't really lock down a place to meet. So we had went to the school, and they were going to let us do like monthly services, but we got crushed in the community for being in the school because everyone was like separation of church and state. Like there was this whole Facebook thread and all this stuff. And then to the point it blew up so bad locally that they called me back and were the reporter and was like, do you have a comment? And so I'm giving comments, and Jay's on my board, and David Butler, or another guy on my board, he called me. He's like, stop giving comments. Like, it's just, you learn in real time. But all this stuff blew up, and it was like, wait, what's happening? And so then for several months, we didn't know. We wanted to go meet weekly. We felt like we needed to for consistency, and we were ready, but we didn't really. The school system wasn't going to give us any time to plan, and they really, you could tell they didn't want us there because they're getting calls still, so they have all these formal meetings about what to do because they know they technically legally can't kick us out. All this stuff was happening. And so behind the scenes, a church was closing in our city, and they had thought about us, and I reached out, and we built a relationship. Now this church was of a denomination that was pretty liberal, and so they're very different than how we are shaped theologically. And I remember having a moment with them meeting, and they're like, we think the Holy Spirit's in this. And matter of fact, we don't want any of those differences to intervene in what we think God is doing. And so basically what happened, we were able to take over that church and then start our weekly services. So before we ever had a weekly service, we had a building. And so that it came out of nowhere, but it was one of those things as a church planner where I looked and said, that was our biggest need holding us up, and God just did it. And so we don't own the building outright. We're in a rent to own situation with them, which really worked into our favor because we can walk away at any point over the next 2 years. And so it was just kind of how God orchestrated that. And then that's given us a kind of a consistency in a community where people look at us and now they think we're legitimate, because in New England, like, if you don't have a building, it's just really weird for people. Like, because if you're operating out of your house or something, they're like, look, that's just too weird. And I think that's kind of like an everywhere thing too. And so it gave us legitimacy, and we've been able to see people come to our church that have struggled with addiction and hear the gospel. And people have been in jail, have been like, it's just been just so cool to see now that we're having services, how God has just brought those people to us to hear the gospel and interact with us in a powerful way. And it was something only God could have orchestrated.
That's awesome.
I've been in the building. It's a neat New England church building. It's lakeside, isn't it? Don't you have a lake behind you?
Yeah. Well, it's the river that's connected to the ocean. So I don't know. Yeah. Anasquam River.
Yeah.
Jay always says I live on an island, but I don't, but you do. Okay, Kody,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
it's man-made, but it's definitely an island. They call it the island.
Josh does live on the island. I've been to his house. It's definitely island. The island breeze is there all the time. He's got water right out of his back door.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Tell me you don't have water right outside your back door, Josh.
It's a little pool. Yep.
Kody, listen, as you're sharing that story, I'm just, I'm reminiscing because I was in New England for more majority of that season of your life where you're wrestling through that. The reporters are calling, you're emailing us going, guys, what do I do? Wise people are telling you, hey, stop talking. Just stop talking. But church planning a lot of times is foreign. Most people, when you hear church planning, they think of something. They have something in their mind of what a church plant is. Just like when people think of church, they have something in their mind. It could be a building, it could be a place, it could be whatever it is. And like you said, for most people, when they think of church, their mind automatically goes to a building, which is why you're making allude to that gives churches legitimacy, right? People think, oh, they're good because they have a building. And I would agree with your second statement of like, yes, it is true in New England, but it is also, I believe, true just about everywhere. Is people, they're uncertain of what it looks like for a church to be outside of not having their own building with a sign that says it's their church building and things of that sort. But there's lots of misconceptions about church planting. And I've heard tons. When you hear church planting, somebody's mind automatically goes to it. If there was something in your mind, you're going, hey, there's something about church planting that most people get wrong. What would you say that is? What's a misunderstanding about church planting that often people run to and they go, well, that's what I think of when I think of church planting, that you found that really kind of gets you?
Well, yeah. So this has come about over the last several months. And as I attempted to, my desire in Cape Ann is to build relationships with existing churches. And what I found is that the perception of our church plant was that we wanted to steal their people. And so I think if for a church planter who's doing it for the right reasons, they're not looking to steal existing churches' people. Like literally like I don't want those people no, like I'm trying to reach other people. And that was one of those things that I didn't feel like it would be so like pastors would be up front. Like, are you, one of them told me that they had a member come to them and say, is this new church trying to steal all of our people? And I was like, look, no, I'm all set. Like you can have your people. Like I'm good. Like, cause they probably wouldn't work in our context. So it's totally fine. And so I think that's the biggest one that that I've felt in our community is just like, I'm not looking to steal your people. Like, that's just kind of, I don't know where I think it's this competition thing. I think it's everywhere, but it's just not true. Now there may be some guys, I don't know, like I don't, there may be some guys out there that just want to transfer, Christians and do all that. But for me, like I'm just not, I'm all set with that. You can have those Christians, disciple them well. Like I'm all set. I want to reach that family that literally I'm thinking about a family on my street right now. That's who I'm praying for. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there is a territorial or something along those lines mindset, and I think does it exist? What do you think, Josh? You think does it exist there in Venice? You think, or around Venice? You're not going to call. We're not trying to call out anybody, but do you think it exists among pastors, territory or competition or?
I've seen it. I mean, it's prevalent. I mean, no one's outright said, "Well, Josh, this is how I feel, and I think this is what is happening over here, or with you, or with someone else." I always, I always push back on if someone leaves a church and they come to our church. I always ask about how they left and are you following the Lord, and do you have anything that you need to go make right? Did you tell the pastor? Like those kind of things. And then the cool thing is, as I'm getting to know more local pastors in our area, just to build community and build encouragement, kind of like what you're saying, Kody, is like if someone does move between churches, we want to be a team and be healthy in that, and honor one another and honor the church that they left or they came to. And really at the end of the day, if I invite someone to church, I'm always like, if you don't already have a church home, I'd love, we'd love to invite you to our church. And typically people will say, "Oh yeah, I go to this church." I'm like, "Oh, that's awesome." And if I know the pastor, it gives you a chance to say, "Man, I love your pastor and what y'all are doing, and just excited for you." But if they're not churched, if they don't know Christ, like you said, neighbor, someone that you meet, which is a lot of people down in South Florida, most they might have a religious background, but most are not in a church, and most of them truly don't know the Lord or understand the gospel. They might have religion, but they don't understand relationship. But I have seen and I have been around church culture that speaks of other churches in town as competition. Like I've literally heard those words come I've heard those words spoken. And okay, if you want to look at it as a business, if that's your perspective on church, yeah, I guess you could come up with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's not the kingdom, right? We need all kinds of churches, like you were saying earlier, gospel preaching churches, biblical churches, to reach all types of people. We need churches in the downtown and the rural areas. We need churches everywhere to reach every man, woman, and boy. So yeah, I've seen it. I hate it. I know that in any pastor's heart, including mine, pride can grow. And I think when there's a spirit of competition, or a spirit of like, I own people, like if they're in my church, like there's some pastors that treat it like they make all the decisions. It's like, no, we're the under shepherds from the good shepherd, and our job's to lead our people well. As long as we have them, whether they move away or if they do leave our church, I think we should just have a clear conscience. That's a long answer to what you just asked, but um, what are your thoughts?
No, I mean, I agree. I mean, yeah, no, I agree with everything you said. I don't really have any extra thoughts on it. I just want to see your input on that, because eh, if I'm looking at the screen right now, I see two other individuals, including myself, and we all have experience with church planting in some way, shape, or fashion, right? Whether it be a campus, whether it be autonomous, whether it be, all different types of church planting, and we've all ventured into church planting, and we've seen the highs and the lows. We all have our stories of what God has done, what we've seen God do, and just to be honest, I think sometimes, I don't know. I mean, I share from my own personal experience. If I wasn't for church planning, I don't know if I would have seen some of the things that I've seen God do. It's just that put me in a position to do that, is stepping out on faith and saying, God, I'm gonna take this step, and if it doesn't work out, I'm just in trouble. And I'm hearing Kody's story, and Kody's going, hey, I stepped out once and the timing wasn't right, and I was devastated by that. And then God clearly called him again to the same place, and he stepped out a second time, and that wasn't the story. This is the story now, is of God showing you, okay, look, now is your time. And this is not anything new. This is biblical. We see this all throughout scripture. We see people who God tells them something, and they may try to do it in their own timing, in their own way, and it doesn't go through, right? It doesn't come through the way, like, think about Abraham. You got Abraham, God promises him a child, and he's like, well, nothing's happening. So he and his wife say, hey, here's my, my servant girl, and he has a child, but that's not the promised one, right? That's not the one, because it wasn't the right time, and God was going to come through. And so God engineers these things, and he does these things in his own time. And so I'm just encouraged by Kody's story. Kody, I want to thank you for sharing your story and spending some time with us. I hope you're encouraged by listening as well. Kody, it would be wrong of me to say, hey, got a church planter on here, and there's pastors, and I'm not talking specifically about your church plant in general, but as a church planter, um, most of the time pastors might think, when a church planter calls you, what's the number one thing they're looking for? Money, right? I have found in my experience, uh, money's not the only thing a church planter needs. Now, to be clear, a church planter needs money, but it's not the only thing. In what ways outside of money? All right, so let's not talk about money. That's the given. Church planters need resources to be able to do things. But outside of that, Kody, what are some of the best ways that pastors have supported you outside of financial support? What are some of the best ways you've been supported?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the ways that I view that, right? And so when I look at my life and some of the best partnerships that I've had, and I look at other church planners, um, what I see is pastors from the outside, or churches from the outside, or even maybe individuals. They view what we're doing as like sort of like this adoption, where they're like, we're gonna adopt Kody's family and just make sure that they feel supported and know that we're there for them. Now, that's not always money. Now, it does include money sometimes, but that money is not necessarily cash. It can be other things as well that cost them money. But sometimes it's just knowing, like when we have this church, for instance, that they've come, they don't give a lot of monthly support, right? But what they do is they send people here. My attic that I'm in right now, they helped finish it because they have the skill set to do that. And I needed a new office, like to move my office up here. They helped do that. They paid for it. They've randomly called our family and said, hey, come down we have a missionary house, stay there. They gave us a really nice car to drive around. They gave us gift cards while they just blessed us. And when we were there, we felt like, oh, this church cares. Like my whole family, like my kids were like, they literally were asking me the other day if we're going back there this summer. I'm like, well, buddy, I don't know. Like, but for me, like, I think of them as like, they got me, and I know they have me. So if we need anything, they're the people we call. And that's not just money. That's just like, yo, this thing's going on. Like I need someone to help me think through this. And that church's name is Fruitland. The executive pastor was actually here a couple weeks ago. He brought his whole family up here, stayed in a hotel, and they're actually going to renovate our church for us. And so they're such a blessing, but they don't give like a lot of monthly stuff. They have, and they may do that, but when they take care of us, like we feel loved and supported. And I just consider it as like this, like if you're gonna really support a church plant, adopt the family. Like make that family that family know that you're in it for them, you're with them, whatever they need. And that sometimes may mean money. That sometimes may mean a date night. It may mean that they need other stuff, right? It may just mean that they need you to call them and pray for them like every week. Like I don't know, like it's really case by case, but make sure they feel like, man, they got people, because it's lonely. It really is. It's a really lonely thing to do. You feel like no one truly understands the weight and the pressure, but when you have people like that in your life, you know you're going to be okay, because even when you have those weird weeks, like you're good. Like Jay, you've done this. So one of the things that you did that we still talk about to this day is that Milestone one Christmas bought our kids so many gifts. So to the point where this year they had less gifts. And Lindsay and I was like, what happened? She's like, Milestone last year bought them so many gifts. And we still talk about, and they talk about like those moments where people from the outside just said, hey, look, we're gonna take care of you. We're with you. We're for you. That stuff that keeps people going. Church planners going. It really does.
Now, to be fair, you didn't tell them it was Milestone. You took credit for it, right? You were supposed to take credit for it.
Yeah, I think we did.
I hope so.
But Lindsay
That was
and
the
I,
point.
yeah,
Because I don't
yeah,
ever want to be like, hey, we got
yeah,
less because mom and dad didn't have somebody helping them out. I want mom and dad. Hopefully you did. You were supposed to take credit for it. Yeah, that was that's something. Yeah, I love what you're saying, because sometimes, again, pastors, they get a call or they get an email from a church planner. A lot of times what they're thinking is all they care about is, can I get some money on them? I have learned in my just small time in church planning, my experience in church planning, a partnership is not a one-way deal. It should never be a one-way deal. It should always be two ways. There's a partnership where the partner church is loving on the family or taking care of the family, as the things you said, but there's also ways in which you can support and serve the partner church. And that can be simple things. It's not huge, but simple things. And so I love what you're saying there, is because I want to clear that up, because hopefully if pastors are listening to the Pastor Pod today and they get a call from a church planner, they're not discouraged and going, all they want is the money support, because that shouldn't be the case. There's other ways you can support church planning and be involved in church planners' life, such as Kody and his family and other church planners. There's church planners all over. I saw, a gathering of 200 plus church planners the other day in Georgia. I saw church planning is a great need, and there are amazing people jumping to the call of church planning. And so much so that I was part of a network, and I'll say this straight. I was talking to a network the other day, and I was like, hey, I may not be a good fit for your church planning network, but I said, hey, don't write me off. I'd love to be on the other end of it. How can I help you support other church planners? As a church planner myself, I feel like that's one of my heartbeats, is I want to help church planning. So Kody, that's encouragement for you, because I know the culture of New England. And if a church planner has a great need or something like that, the people who rally first typically are church planners. They're not afraid to step out because they understand they get that call. So, pastors, there's lots of ways you could be involved in church planning outside of just writing a check or sending money to the church planter. Well, Josh, it's been a great podcast. Kody's been a great guest. You have any final thoughts, any final questions for Kody? Anything you want to add before we wrap up today?
Well, I just appreciate you taking time, Kody, to be on the podcast, and I just hope all the listeners will be praying for you and your family, and looking forward to seeing what God's going to continue to do through your church. And man, I just love your heart, and love to keep up how we can be praying for you guys.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you guys having me. Love you guys.
Oh, I feel very special. You said you love me.
I do, man. I love you a lot, Jay.
I would give you a hug, but we don't.
He said he would jump off a bridge into water for you, something like that.
Yeah,
Like a safe
Jay's
bridge.
my guy. I love him.
Hey, listen,
like a
all right.
10-foot bridge.
Yeah, on this note, we're going to wrap up the podcast today. I want to thank everybody for listening in. Thank you for joining us as usual. If you have any comments you'd like to share with us, you'd like to, maybe a topic you'd like us to cover, you can reach out to us at thepastorpod@gmail.com. You can reach out to Josh and I directly on social media. Yeah, for Josh, myself, Kody, our guest from Gloucester. Thanks for joining us on the Pastor Pod. Hope to see you back here next week.